need the mic? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Really, I created the play in 1980, the first version of it. 5 years later, we were in New York, and that was a rewrite, more or less the script that you saw tonight. Although we did make some changes that maybe were obvious that had to do with what's going on in the world today. The reason we're here at the Hermosa Beach Playhouse is really Stephanie's passion. Stephanie worked with me at the Odyssey in 2001. We did a 20th anniversary production. She also worked on some other shows. And so she, for some time, has periodically called me and said, you know, I got this Hermosa Beach Playhouse and we want to do the play, we want to do the play. And I would say, of course, we're friends. Because traditionally the rights are restricted in Los Angeles and in New York. And because of what's going on in our world today, specifically for me, Iraq, which I'll just say right now, I didn't agree with the invasion. I have a nephew and several friends who have served there. It's not against the warrior, but I am against the war. I think it's sort of sad that when it all began, that we weren't listened to, those of us who were against that invasion. Now it's turning out that, sadly, we were mostly right. So I decided that I thought that the rights should be free, so that we could all get a feeling of what the guys today are going through. So this is the third production that we've had of this play within the year in the LA area. Each one has been vastly different. One was a sort of a school production, professional school. The last one in Burbank was a tiny little 45-seat theater, and then there was this one with all the oohs and the ahs, the music and the sound and the lights. Taking it to Broadway. She says, "Are we taking it to Broadway?" I directed the play in 85, 86 in New York, public theater. And that was where it got published, and that's where it sort of gained an international reputation. Most of the 1980s I spent on the road directing this play and being in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. One thing that I would say about it is someone was asking me during the break, trying to see if she's still here, let's see, what it was like for me to see this production. And what I have to say about it is that it's like a really great old friend that's full of spirit, full of soul. And there was a time in the 80s when I felt like, oh yeah, I'm proud of the fact that I created this play, but at the same time, I felt that it was an albatross, that I was getting tight as a theater person because I do other stuff, and I've done lots of other things. I was actually making a point to direct other types of plays, so I wouldn't be tied into this. And I was kind of whining to a musician friend of mine that, you know, yeah, this Tracer's thing has got me tight. Everybody thinks I'm nothing but guys and beers and fucks. You know, so, and he said, listen, John, listen, you made a great album. People will play that album forever. Enjoy the album. And tonight I had a whole row of family and friends, many of whom have seen this play many times. And they sit there and they repeat the words of the album as the album is being played. And I'm quite proud of what these young men did tonight. I met with them a few times. Ron and I met with them. Almost every company that does this play finds Vietnam vet advisors. In this particular case, they had myself and Ron Kovic, because Ron lives down here, many of you probably know that, and we've known each other for many years, and I found it a way for us to just hook up. So that's how we started hanging out together. It was also coming to Tracer's rehearsal for this show. So that's kind of a brief explanation of how we ended up here in this moment. Stephanie's passion. Open to questions. I would love to bring Ron up here. created piece. We were all there at different times and different places, and I was creating it at a time when I didn't know if anyone was even going to be interested in it. All that existed at that time in the theater was there was one play that I'd seen, David Rabe's Sticks and Bones. There were 2 movies, Apocalypse Now and Interior. And I had this great strong feeling that they didn't hit me personally. I know this has been in the press. I haven't read the articles yet, but I know the press is out there. And so when I got the group together, besides our own discussions and improvisational work and rap sessions and all of that, we read all the books that were out. The books came before the plays. And one of my favorite books was Born on the 4th of July. And when I read that book, at a certain point I realized that we had enough material to do a sort of work in progress performance. I actually quoted Ron's poem, We Had Not Met. And the play opened, and I didn't know if anyone would like it, and it ended up being this great success. 40-seat theater. It still was a great success for a 40-seat theater. It ran for a year. And so kind of like the rest is history, but Ron Kovic is very, very much a part of it. I know John Drouillard. John is the director of this production. I know him because I first met John when he was directing a student production at USC 18 years ago. And so there is a family aspect to Tracers that still lives. You're looking at a couple of generations and the new generation. I've been, in the last 2 shows, I've been doing these after show talks. The last one we did it like kind of every Sunday. It was just wide open. Ask about the play, talk about politics if you like. It's not particularly my favorite thing, but we have some experts here. So, you know, I leave it open.
Anybody have a question? In the back.
Did you send them to boot camp or anything?
Yeah.
Did you send them to boot camp?
He said that we send them to boot camp.
We had a pretty rough rehearsal.
Yeah, they had rehearsal. This cast had a very peculiar situation because most groups do some kind of a boot camp, or they go on a camping trip. They do something, but they also usually have 6 to 8 weeks of rehearsal. You had how many? 2 weeks of rehearsal. Serious teaching. It was all very intense and very fast, but I would really give John Drouillard credit for performances because 2 weeks ain't easy for those of you who do theater. Yes, sir.
Did doing this play have any kind of emotional impact on the actors who, of course, weren't in Vietnam? Weren't even born.
The question was, did the show, doing the show kind of emotional impact on these guys here, what these guys saw?
It's definitely brought to light stuff that I would have never had to think about. Can you guys hear me?
He doesn't project.
I was one of those 2 weeks that I don't project. Yeah, I would never have had to think about these things, and just getting the experience to pull off Ron and John made me think about things that I would never have dreamed about thinking about before, and seeing how it does apply to our Iraq war today. It definitely plugged me more into what's going on right now. I think our generation is lucky in so many ways, and one of those ways is we're not connected. And so this definitely helps me connect. And I think one of the things that everybody hopes from the cast and production is that this plugs everybody in again to what's going on. So it definitely does for me. Yeah.
I agree, especially since these guys, they're real veterans that wrote it, and to personalize it, and that these guys actually did that, and like Little John, Nick, was saying.
I don't know their real names.
We don't either. We call each other by our character names. Yeah, man, just gotta get second what he said. Given that we're in Iraq right now, in Afghanistan, you know, I have friends who their parents were Vietnam vets, and I got some family friends back home that they're Iraqi vets right now, and it's, yeah, I mean, just knowing that these events were real and are happening now, and you personalize it. It's, you know, I've never, you know, been to war or anything like that, or in the military, but you know, it's all in here about, you know, getting into character and knowing it's real. It's very intense, absolutely.
Yes.
So, we haven't cared enough about the GI when it comes back. That's the whole point. So what is the country doing now?
She's talking about other veterans in the audience. Stand up. Is it about how we're treated? Each one is different. I know there's a lot of awareness about, I think, we had a movement in the 80s. The Vietnam vet movement was about this crying out for recognition. At the same time that I was conceiving this play, 6 or 7 guys were meeting in Washington saying, hey, we should have a monument. Other things were happening. And then bit by bit, like Ron and I, we all sort of got to know each other. We created a movement that resulted in this recognition of veterans. I think also at the same time there was an over the top welcome home the troops, support the troops that is almost without feeling. It becomes so automatic. She says she remembers when they were spitting on us.
They were Republicans.
They were
I was at the Republican Convention in 1972 in Miami Beach, protesting Richard Nixon, the Vietnam War, with the Vietnam veterans against the war. And we got within a few feet of Richard Nixon. I don't know how we did it. Bobby Mueller, paraplegic, who went on to found Vietnam Veterans of America, a friend of mine from the Bronx Veterans Hospital from the late 1960s. And Bill Wyman, a double amputee in a wheelchair, who died a few years ago, who was wounded in Vietnam. We got within a few feet of the president, and we started to shout, "Stop the bombing, stop the war." We were thrown out of the convention hall, dragged out the hall. How many of you saw that scene in the film? Do you remember the scene at the end of that? And but a Republican who I've long since forgiven, delegate came up to me and spit in my face. So yes, the veterans were spat at, but not. I mean, I don't think many veterans were spat at when they came home, or soldiers who came home. I think that's more of a myth that's been created over the years. I was someone spit in my face, and I forgive him for that. But it was a very intense time. It was a very passionate time. Emotions, intense.
For me, there was a lot of hiding. I mean, I went to college right after I got out of the service, and I realized that probably the least popular thing I could say is I just got back from Vietnam. So after a while, I just stopped saying it. I just kind of shrunk back into my own little corner. But it never went away. Yes?
I thought the statistic where the drill sergeant was saying that 80% of the recruits were targets. Do you find that to be something that's significant of most wars that, I don't agree with all the call wars, that so many of our people are not well trained to even go into war and they're just dispensable?
That piece, she's asking about the 80% are targets monologue that the drill sergeant does. The way that piece came about was, in the first rendition of the play, it ended with just getting the guys off stage with go to the barbershop pool. And a Marine came in and he said to me, he said, you know, he said, He said, I think the drill sergeant scene is great, it's really honest, and yada yada, the language is perfect. He said, but you got to show somehow that he cares. And so I did not write that monologue, but another guy who was playing the part wrote it for himself. And in my own situation, I was on a sort of largish installation. Yet I was on the perimeter most of the time, and I think it's I can't speak for Iraq and Afghanistan, but for Vietnam, it was very true. We went in, and we occupied it. We had these great big bases. Sometimes people think, well, you have to be out in the field and get shot at. It was just as dangerous to be on one of those big bases because you could be rocketed and there was no defense. So that's where it all comes from, the rockets and the mortars in our large, very opulent installations when they're going around in tunnels.
Well, I guess the part that really got to me was if the government really just kind of shove everybody in there and throw it at the wall, see what students kind of attitude, it just seems that the value of life is so insignificant in the larger scope, and yet when you get down, everybody has their family, everybody has their son, their father, their uncle, their brother who's actually in that war, and yet Big Brother, those powers don't really, it seems as though they don't take that into consideration. Or I don't know where that responsibility lies.
In this current situation, she actually is making statements about the large installations and about the government maybe not caring about the GIs. And in our current situation, as a veteran, I felt very, very strongly that way. I know you've probably heard this before, but we were sent to war by men who didn't go. Didn't know the sacrifices involved. That's the thing that all military does. That's the one thing that people don't quite realize is that even if you don't lose your life or have a severe injury, as Ron did, you're still sacrificing. You're giving up your life to serve the country for 2 years, 4 years, whatever it is. The time your life is this little world around you and the guys is sacrifice. And I think that the current administration and that group of men that sent us all to this particular war, none of them went. They had no personal understanding of sacrifice. That's my opinion. Yes?
Sean, right, you've been in the military, correct? So what is your particular take on, because you made the speech about the similar type of thing, about how we're sending people out there untrained, but we're unwilling, and that whole monologue. How does that really relate to your real experience having been in the military?
Oh, that's a good question. To be honest with you, it's a conflict for me. In a way, because I'm trying to portray the character the way it was written, and he has the conflict. Myself, I have a conflict because when you're in the military, you're not in a position to ask questions. You're there to do what you're supposed to do your duty, and do it well. And when you question things, it leaves room for fear, it leaves room for doubt. So you really don't have time to necessarily get political. I mean, you have your views, your personal views, but for myself, I wasn't forced in. I was trying to make my dad proud, who also was a Vietnam vet. And I felt it was a way for me to become a better man by doing what he did. And so it basically was a tribute to him. I didn't agree with everything, but at the same time, you don't have time for it. You have to do what you're told because your number can get called, and it's about survival. And a lot of people, like myself, who were in authoritative positions, you can't show it. You just can't. That may be how I feel, but I can't show these guys because someone has to do it. Someone has to lead.
Right, it's like a separate issue.
Yeah, it's a separate issue, so you can't, so acting-wise, yeah, it was tough putting it together, but did I do it?
The thing that happens, that I think that I carried in, I've done many of these productions, and sometimes when I'm directing, I work really fast, and people ask me, how can I get that done so fast? And I think it has a lot to do with the military, getting people to follow you, and getting people to submit themselves to the group, to work as a unit.
that this is an ensemble production. If one actor dies, we all die. It's that way. Sir, you got a question? I don't keep raising your hand.
Yeah, more comment on how much I appreciate the impact and the way that all of you guys put together this play. It reminds me of two uncles of mine that were in World War II. They would not tell me what happened as I was growing up, and yet I was a child after World War II, and all I saw were this glory stuff. I can see incredible damage, death, and destruction by political calculation that brought it on to begin with. But the destruction and the death and the blood and the disaster and the horrible stuff that goes on, I don't see it. It took many years before I actually saw and got an appreciation from it from various theater like this. But this isn't very often. This doesn't show up very often. This is not a high volume impact on the political scene in the American.
Well, they don't want you to see the human cost of war. They don't want you to see they don't want you to see the paraplegic wards. They don't want you to see the intensive care wards. They have embedded reporters in Iraq. They want to filter what's really happening in the field during the war.
They don't even want you to see coffins.
They don't want you to see the coffins when they come home.
Which is amazing.
They want to shut down. They want to shut down the voices of opposition, the dissidents, the people, the courageous voices who even before this war began in the spring of 2003, those voices that couldn't get on television, that were trying to say that this war was wrong, that this government was leading us in the wrong direction. The human cost of war, what it really means to be wounded, physically, psychologically. Almost 300,000 of our young men and women who are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, 1.6 million have already come back. 300,000 are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, anxiety attacks. Their lives will never be the same. Some of them will never live out their lives because of suicide. Do we really understand when we make the decision to go to war what it really means to send a young 20-year-old, a young man, a young woman into combat? We've got to find alternatives, first of all, to this type of behavior. I have seen war, I have lived with war, I have seen war, I have lived with war, I have been in this wheelchair. This is my 40th year paralyzed from my mid-chest down. 40 years I've been in this wheelchair. Almost all the paraplegics and quadriplegics I knew in the Bronx Veterans Hospital, I saw the worst wounded of that war. I lived amongst them. Men who would never be able to feel anything from their mid-chest down again. Men who would never be able to have children. It was like having a ton of bricks dropped on top of you. It was incredible. I don't know how I survived all those years. I'm so grateful to be before all of you tonight. If my life and my sacrifice stands for anything, then let it stand for having learned what war is really all about. And perhaps my life can represent a need in this country, in this world, to move away from violence, away from shock and awe, away from killing and maiming and destroying human beings psychologically and physically, toward diplomacy, toward dialogue, toward talking with one another, finding another way to solve our problems other than brutality and violence. I live with that violence every day. I also live with the hope that we can find a different path, a different way, a creative, nonviolent approach to solving our problems.
Yeah.
One other thing, we have to do it. We have to move in a different direction. And Martin Luther King said, a time comes when silence is betrayal. The most important thing I could share with you tonight, I don't want to say any more tonight, is don't be silenced. You're a citizen of this country. You have a responsibility. Young men and women on both sides, Iraqi and American, are dying and being wounded seriously tonight. Thousands have already been killed. Have you stepped over that line? Have you taken that important step? Do you recognize what an important time this is right now? If you want to send a package to a service person overseas, do that. If you want to protest, then protest. If you want to write a letter, but do something. Be a part of this time just as we were a part of the Vietnam era. John did his plays. I wrote my book on a $42 typewriter. Somehow we touched the heart of this country. But you must take a stand. You must become involved. You are a citizen of this country. You are responsible for what's happening right now, and you must step over that line and do something, make a difference. For me, I cannot do enough to stop this war. What do you think, Vicki?
The United States of America sees this play.
She said that every person in the United States of America should see this play. Should have seen this play before we went to Iraq. I lighten it up a little bit because I love Ron. And Ron and I used to hang out on the streets in the 1980s, on the streets of New York when the play was running. We'd be on the streets. Most of you, I'm sure, have seen Forrest Gump and Gary Sinise's performance, but I'm sure was inspired by him hanging out with Ron and I. And I used to always joke with Ron, you gotta run for president, Ron, you gotta run for president. You just heard why I say you gotta run for president.
You make a good one.
Also, we have another 60s icon who just walked in the door. Our good friend John Densmore from The Doors is here. How I met John was he was an investor in one of my many productions of the play, and we met and we became friends. And he came in to support this show tonight.
I'm just curious, when you came back from Vietnam, how is it that you got into playwriting? I mean, did that experience that you started going to where you went to school or whatever you did, but other people came back and
I started writing there. I started journals there. I was not educated. I went into the service fresh out of high school. I joined, then I volunteered for Vietnam after a year and a half in Texas. And if you remember the Professor and Doc scene, I was a little bit like Doc. I would attach myself to guys who were educated, and I was reading and so forth, but I was not educated. I had this fantasy about getting educated, and I also had a great fantasy about being an actor. So when I got out of the service, I went to school on the GI Bill, and I began to study theater. I continued to write, but mostly at the time I was after becoming an actor, and I did a lot of acting. Now I kind of do all three things. That answers your question.
Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, do you think we still be in Iraq now because of the draft?
I think it would be far more controversial. every young person that I talk to, the question is, we always have, well, I mean, if they're not in the military, well, why don't you care? Well, if there was a draft, I would care. They just say that, just flat out. If there was a draft, I would care. You bet people would be on the streets.
You know, Nick was saying earlier that his generation is blessed for having that detachment. Well, imagine if they didn't have that detachment. I don't think any of us would have that detachment either. So, yeah, very, very different circumstances, I think, right.
Now, Ron was mentioning to me just now about this proposed new GI Bill. And, you know, I had this Jim Webb, who is proposing it. Jim Webb wrote a book called Fields of Fire. Jim Webb is a decorated Marine from the Vietnam War, has been highly critical of what's going on, yet at the same time he's a warrior and he's a leader and has proposed this new GI Bill, and it is something that we should be supporting, not fighting.
That anyone would be fighting just to make the GI Bill a little better than how it is right now, and it is crappy right now.
They had a great GI Bill after any World War II veterans. They had a great, they had a great GI Bill after World War II.
Yeah.
You know, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, it really doesn't matter. We all have to get behind our returning soldiers and our returning veterans. We all have to care about them. And one way of doing that is supporting the GI Bill. The very best if we can spend $50 billion or $60 billion on the Iraq War, can we not take care of our young men and women who are coming up? Can we not give them the best education? Can we not give them the best care at the veterans hospitals? Our World War II veterans, our Korean veterans, our Vietnam veterans, and our Afghan, Iraq, Gulf War veterans as well. They deserve the very best. And that's one thing we should all unite on as a people in this country. We have to take care of those young men and women who we sent off to that war. Whether you believe in the war or not, they deserve the very best treatment, the very best care.
even, you can come back as healthy as the day you went in, but you still gave a sacrifice. There's still a sacrifice. You gave your life. Regardless of whether or not you came back healthy, you gave your life. And so how can we stand here and not support giving our GIs
I came back
the rest of their life?
I came back physically healthy, but I can honestly say for a good 10 years I was a depressed, suicidal fucker. Took a lot of chances. I'm very lucky to be alive for the things I did after the war. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any plans for this play to be shown elsewhere after it ends here? And I'm not sure, like, do you try to solicit theaters?
People find it, it's published, and people find it and license it, and it's their choice to do it. So I don't have any specific plans. If somebody came to me and said, I got some money and I got a theater, I would love to do the play. I love doing the play. I've done it a million times. I still love it like a great old album. Now,
It's really a service.
tiny.
It's really a service to the country.
Thank you.
This play shown again.
My wife and I were talking about it because I had to go to I had to come and meet with these guys, and I had to put off some other things. And we just said, no, it's the Tracers Ministry. The Tracers Ministry.
That's true.
To go out there and work. Yes, sir.
Was the play close to the real thing? Was the play close to the real thing was the question.
Well, Ron is whispering in my ear. Yes, absolutely. And every guy in my original group, you see that list of guys, we were all there at different times in different places. And all the scenes in the play are based on true stories. Some of them are embellished for theatricality, but basically they're based in truth. It is a fact that Baby Son bought what he thought was incense, and it turned out to be heroin. That's really funny. And we didn't create the scene afterward, but in particular, the combat scenes and more intense scenes, they're all completely true. I was very obsessed about getting the language right because we had this whole other language over there that I hadn't seen in anything else that had been done, and so that was really important to me. It is kind of another language in its own way. Yeah, we cut a few. Yes, sir.
Yeah, before the 4th of July, of course, was made into a Tom Cruise movie. Has anybody examined the possibility of making a version of Tracers, or do you think it would adapt to it?
We have almost made a movie several times. One of the reasons that I restricted the rights in the LA and New York area is that I was being careful about how it would be seen because there was noise about making a movie. Then it went away. Then we had offers, which I turned down. Then people went on and made their own movies in the 80s. I think around 98 or 99, a great deal of interest came at me again about making a movie, and I did write a screenplay. It's a very surreal screenplay, like the play, but it's turning the oral history into visual history. I wrote the screenplay. I had some young independent producers who really wanted to make the movie. Then we had September 11th, which made many people get a little bit scared. Then the screenplay got optioned again, and we invaded Iraq. Scared people away again. So what I have is I have a situation where every young movie star in Hollywood loves the screenplay, but no one will when it's finest. You could have this. Thank you. Right over here.
There was just a comment about it was stated that the possibility of bringing back the draft. Actually, what we have now is an economic threat. If you look where recruiters go, they are not here at Hermosa Beach. They're South Central, Vermont High School, Southgate, those places. And I just wanted to pitch an article that Ron wrote, I think it was a couple days ago, the Truth Day, about counter-recruiting and going to these places and giving students, fair information about what they're being asked to do.
It's called Stopping the War Machine. Military recruiters must be confronted. You type in Stopping the War Machine, it's all over the internet now. You can read about it. Actually, we're going to a fundraiser. Terry and I are going to a fundraiser tomorrow in Monterey Park for CAMS. Could you talk about CAMS? You work with Arlene in a way. The work that you do at CAMS and counter-recruiting in campuses to keep kids from having to come home in wheelchairs like me?
Sure. CAMS is an organization. It's the coalition. Thank you. CAMS is a organization. It's the Coalition Against Militarization in Our Schools. It was founded out of teachers and parents and community people who were concerned about the fact that by No Child Left Behind, there's a provision in there that requires that military recruiters be allowed on campus, that they are given the names, addresses, and phone numbers of children without their permission. And the recruiters that go on campus frequently lie to the students. At best, they underinform them. They don't tell them about the important things that they're going to be asked to do, what the effects will be on their lives. So CAMS, we adopt schools in the inner city. We go out, we leaflet, we participate with other groups such as Veterans for Peace, and give seminars on campus. And we're proud to say that Ron is on our board. So I want to thank him for that kind of support.
Yes, sir.
Any relationship going on in Vietnam?
He's asking if there's a relationship to what's going on now to Vietnam. Well, I'm going to hand it off to Ron in a minute, but you know, those of us who were in Vietnam, we did take part in the least popular war in the history of the country, maybe the history of the world, but we still went. And I think certainly there are many, many parallels. There is a draft. It's called stop loss. You know, the guys that thought they were only going to go for a year keep going back, and it's happening more and more. We know that. Certainly the after effects. We're hearing more and more and more about suicides and PTSD and all these things. You know, a handshake and a welcome home doesn't do it. We need to be taken care of.
Yeah, when I was asked to do the show, you know, I directed the show a couple of times, and actually the last one I did it before, it was during the 90s. We were in relative peace, though we were never around the world. But obviously there was some real attraction to directing the show again under the current situation. And you know, and many times, and we've talked about this a lot, tracers you can look at in a lot of different ways. And it's often, I think, mistaken as an anti-war play. I don't think any of us are pro-war. But it doesn't take, I don't think it takes that hard a position. I think if it takes that position at all, or if it makes that position, it's because it's incredibly honest about the portrayal of soldiers and war and what the sacrifice really is. And obviously, Vietnam had its own group of conditions the guys that we're coming home with, but you know, what exactly has changed? You know, I mean, if I can, you know, want to get political for a second, I mean, we're in a war of choice. We are still not taking care of our veterans. We are still fighting over things like the GI Bill, which is completely incredible. So I think that if tracers, certainly my mission with tracers is to really remind everyone what it means to be a soldier and how much you really give up. Like I say, even if you come home healthy, you still give up that part of yourself. So that's my wish with these guys.
I just had one. We're our World War II veterans. Yes. If you wouldn't mind, could you, both of you, could you share with us what the GI Bill, if you could remember the GI Bill? What was it like coming home from World War II, and what was that GI Bill like? What don't we have now?
I can't complain about the GI Bill, actually. I used to fly in the 8th Air Force, Oakland, couldn't be able to be here. And the 8th, if you want a few statistics, just in the 8th Air Force, 26,000 got killed, 28,000 ended up in business award. Anyway, but I think World War II was something that was something we were fighting for that was somewhat just. And anyway, but I have no complaints about the GI Bill because I lost a lot of my hearing. Without my hearing aids, I couldn't hear a thing. And I was given these hearing aids. I've had about 5 different pairs. As they improve, I seem to get better ones. So I really can't complain about the GI Bill or the Veterans Administration. And so I noticed that you have a hearing problem. I noticed that you don't have any hearing aids.
You're right, I actually got hit by a lot of artillery and I do have a problem with my hearing. I try to hide it.
I suggest you see an audiologist.
I got enough problems. I'm going deaf also. Well, the question I wanted to ask about the GI Bill was, I heard that the GI Bill was excellent after World War II. Was that true?
My experience with the GI Bill, actually, it bought me my first home. Without that GI Bill, I never would have been able to afford it or get it. And I thank the government for that. The 3 years I fought the war, that's something else again. But as far as the GI Bill is concerned, I believe that the government should do a hell of a lot more than what they're doing. Our boys deserve it, our boys need it, and their lives are at stake all the time. I know we fought a lot of missions over to Europe. Never knew once we got in that plane whether we were coming back again. But fortunately, both Maury and I were very lucky. We got through it. With 26 missions, we got through it. And, like I say, the GI Bill has to be worked over and help these kids that are coming home. And most important of all, as far as I'm concerned, is I'm a past commander of the war veterans. And I've been in the hospitals, and these kids that are coming back, I hate to say it, are not getting the help that they need. They're not getting their wounds and everything about it. They're not getting, the hospitals are overstocked, understaffed, and a lot of that stuff has to be worked over at the VA. And God willing, I hope this war ends pretty soon before I get too old. Thank you very much.
I didn't go to school on the GI. I maybe thought I should have gotten more money than what I got, but I did collect money when I went to school. Yes, ma'am?
So what did the Vietnam veterans get or not get compared to the World War II veterans on the GI?
I don't have those statistics.
I don't mean in numbers. I mean, were they entitled to education? Did they get good medical?
Education is there, yeah, and you can get a down payment for a house. Basically, you can get $36,000 as a down payment for a house.
Medical care?
Medical care, yeah. I use the VA medical care. It's you have to wait longer than when you go to your average doctor. But yeah, you know, what we're seeing now that's different is the new wounds because of the roadside bombs and all of that stuff. And one of the things that was pioneered in Vietnam was the medevac thing, where we actually saved more people than were ever saved in wars before. Now we're even better at it, but also we're bringing back a lot more wounded soldiers, people that will deal with physical problems for the rest of their lives. We're dealing with extreme burn victims, and we're dealing with extreme head injuries, things that haven't happened before. I don't know if I answered your question. Yes?
That's more of a comment than question. One of the things I like about this particular piece is when you see movies, it's all bad, or when you hear people talk about war, it's incredibly vilified, whatever war it is. Or sometimes it's incredibly glorified. And the nice thing about this piece is you're seeing real people, and you're seeing all the levels. You're seeing the giddiness of a 19-year-old at the same time as you're seeing shooting people and killing people. And I think that's a good balance.
Thanks.
I think between the writing and the performances, you really get that understanding of the reality of it.
It's a real broad, honest.
The humor and the camaraderie was very, very important to me. We talked a lot about this in the workshops, that there was this camaraderie. That when we all came back from Vietnam, World War II guys came back in groups, mostly, as I understand. You can tell me if I'm wrong. We came back singularly. We had this rotation system 1 year and came back. So you kind of came back alone. War was very unpopular. We went our separate ways. We went to school or we went back to work or whatever. So what I missed a lot is that camaraderie. It's almost like there's no other camaraderie like there is in the military and under fire at times. And there's humor. So it was really important to me to bring out. So thanks. And David.
I was going to say, one thing I remember from the 70s is that in World War II, my impression was they brought people back, at least ostensibly as heroes. But my recollection of the 70s is, as you say, they were anti-heroes, and for a while, Vietnam veterans were actually on the official government list of prejudice categories. I mean, you couldn't discriminate against race, religion, sex. There was a period of time in the 70s when being a Vietnam veteran was so heavily discriminated against, it was actually on the government list. And so there's a totally different attitude towards the veterans there as opposed to World War II.
In television writing in the 70s, if you wanted a guy to be a bad guy in a cop show, you just made him a Vietnam veteran. They didn't have to spend anything.
Your daughter, Celeste.
It's my daughter.
I just want to tell you guys that I've been watching this play since I was 9 years old.
She ran the sound when she was 10 years old on the first production.
I have stage managed it, I have run sound on it, I've watched I don't know how many different productions in Australia and London and New York and all over the country, and this was just as good as any one of them. You guys really brought each character to life.
First time, Terry Ann, do you remember the first time we went to the rehearsal at, what is it, Light Magic? Light Magic? Rehearsal we went about a week or two ago? Yeah. Light Magic. Yeah, the first time I saw these gentlemen, first time I saw you, I just felt that I was back in 1968 all over again. It was quite an experience for me. Even though I had seen, I think, 17 performances in New York with John Traces with the original cast. But when I saw all of you for the first time, it moved me very deeply. I just had to hold on to my chair because you look so much like us. They look so much like who we were, and they look like who you two were in World War II when you were younger. And they certainly remind me of me when I was 20, just before I was wounded in 1968. But it was eerie, yeah.
Yeah, I look better.
he says he looked better.
You look a lot thinner than
Work will. Cast, stand up, take a bow.
Coming. Thanks to John DiFusco, Ron Kovic, cast of Tracers today.
But
No one else talking about this.
Yeah, I think, you know, the one, these guys have never done it. So it just introduces people basically, Windows 25, it's 10 days, it shows up all the time, has all the they were, you guys have
well, I think, I'm not sure when they scheduled it. By the time we got to actually putting it up, but again, it forces, so
good.
Zero in. I was going to say something, when everyone was talking about the Vietnam thing, I thought that was kind of trite, you know, like you know what I mean? Because, well, you know, we had, I guess, bigger issues. As you know, I've done productions. I can just truly It sounds like you've been there. Yeah. Oh, been there. I was doing